Hey everyone, Miacidae here, welcome back. Today we have a new video and a series for this channel, Tips in Retrospect. We will be covering Black Reliquary, the Darkest Dungeon Overhaul with this one today as the first video. It's really just looking back at the game, trying to take everything I've learned from playing the game front to back, and trying to put together some tips for both new players and seasoned players alike. And just a few notes before we get into things here. This was written during the 0.9 patch, so I don't know what's going to be useful from this in the 1.0 patch and forward. Some things might be completely outdated. As always, there will be timestamps down below if you want to find something quickly or find it back if you are coming back to this video. And by no means is my word gold. I make a lot of mistakes, and if you want to do something else or don't like the tips, don't follow them. I forget a lot of these tips myself in my own playthroughs if you watch my videos, pretty often at that. Do as I say, not as I do, unless you really want to make the same mistakes, or just, do your own thing. I did decide to leave a lot of these smaller tips that I was able to kind of come up without, or some of the larger ones more vague, just because of either time constraints, or I didn't really want to open a can of worms that might be best to their own video or other people have covered in very large detail. I might discuss those a little bit when I get there. Some of those are also just mentioned in things like tooltips or loading screens. An example of that is always remember to put people in the amber dens or to get amber or the lost tech, things like that. Little tips like that might not be in here, but if you'd like to put your own tips down below in the comments, feel free to do so. But let's get started on some of these. So right off the bat, this game plays a lot differently than the normal Darkest Dungeon, which says something because this is an overhaul for Darkest Dungeon. There are slightly more mechanics, which you'll learn very quickly off the bat just in the tutorial. There is more emphasis on things like religion, there's things on the symptoms, diseases, marking, all of that has a little more emphasis, I think. Death blow resistance is tweaked a little bit because once you hit 0, every hit after that will bring you closer and closer and you'll have less of a chance to resist it. Enemies really will not pull their punches, especially bosses. It's best to really go in prepared for everything until you really know what you're doing, and even then, go unprepared because you never know what might happen. The game also introduces a little bit more of religion, I think. If I remember correctly, it was either religious or non-religious. Now it's pagan, faithless, or religious, and each one of them seems to have bonuses associated with them. Be that from actual combat skills that kind of touch on them, camping skills, quirks, some quirks actually, good or bad, interact with those, and even some trinkets. A lot has been tweaked. Take some time getting used to the game. Take it slow at first, as slow as you need. You'll probably have a lot better of a time. There's even, if I can find it, if you click this little microphone, some infocoms that will tell you everything about the game, or at least a lot about it, including a lot of the new stuff like Frantic, Ghoul Fever, and a lot of the new items and things like that. So if you have a question about it, you can generally go here and find somewhat of an answer to it. And the newest feature to this game is the prep round. It almost felt like using revenge on normal jobber fights was a complete waste, and now you're almost forced to use them or some kind of a healing or a preparatory move, because obviously it's a preparatory round. You're almost always buffing yourself, debuffing the enemy, or some form of healing yourself, because most straight up damaging moves will always miss and they cannot crit on the opening round, the prep round. It's better usually to do something to either enhance yourself, heal, or debuff the enemy, and you'll get a lot farther in the game by embracing the prep round, as slow as it may seem to some people. So for those who don't know, they added this whole new tab for people, so that you can see all the hero information that you need, and this will vary hero to hero. On additional information in this tab, I can see that my bounty hunter's riposte will do extra damage versus marked and all that jazz, It tells me how he will move, what happens to him when he crits, and his base virtue chance. If I hop over to Dial here, for example, though, he has a lower riposte, he has a different movement, he has a different crit effect. It tells me any passive effects he has, party restrictions, and he has a unique affliction. It might be a thing to scroll through some of these heroes that you aren't familiar with. The Shield Breaker, for example, will blight on any riposte hit. Simple little things like that to get familiar with them if you don't entirely know what they are, or just want to know, hey, will this hero have a virtue chance or not? Or do they have a specific thing that they do on a riposte? You no longer get extra loot per fight if you are on 0 light. However, that being said, there are advantages and disadvantages being at full light and no light. If you are at 100 light, there is a higher chance of the Lost Legion spawning. They have their own things that they drop. They can be good, they can be a pain in the butt to fight. If you are at 0 light, the Kevarots can spawn, which are a very stressful fight. Like, they do stress damage, they do horror damage, things like that. They have other things that they can do, which can be a very grueling fight. However, they can drop Dark, which is a very, very treasure-heavy thing that can stack very high. It's actually one of the best things to farm if you actually need gold. So while you're not necessarily getting more gold for going torchless, if they spawn, technically you are getting more gold, it's just getting them to spawn. A fun thing to note is that now marks are resistible. That's why if you mark something and it doesn't quite apply, it's not entirely immune, it just might have resisted it. But the second thing is that marks last for entire turns. So if a boss has 2 to 3 actions around, maybe more, maybe less, well, you're not SOL if you just applied it at the wrong time. It will last until, well, that many turns have ended. You can use it, you can get your hits up in the mark in, and then you're good for however many turns unless something else happens. Which is a nice quality of life improvement, I think, just for planning purposes, but also things happen. Some of my favorite moves, especially on characters like Thrall, give Riposte, or if you have the right trinkets, like the Reflex Mainliner, or you're using the consumable, the Reflex Serum, your characters can get Riposte. It can be a very helpful thing throughout many, many dungeons. However, that being said, some characters, some enemies, have things that can ignore Riposte. So always be sure to look out for that. If you have enough information on the enemy, it will show it on their attack right there. If it actually bypasses that, and they won't get an attack back. Certain attacks do, certain don't. Some enemies do it a lot more often than others. Just some simple things to watch out for. There are extremely rare items that can be used to change religion of a hero. To my knowledge, there's only ones that can be used to convert the user's affiliation to pagan or to religious. On hand, I only have the one to use pagan because that's a little more common. You need to beat a roaming boss that is only available after week 100 for the Truth Bearer. The one that changes you to religious is a very rare drop from the Lost Legion. I'm not sure if it has to be on a various difficulty or not. I've only ever seen 2 of them though in my 167 weeks on this file, and I've not seen any on any of my other files, if that puts into perspective how rare they are, or just how bad my luck is with them. They are a consumable that you have to use inside of the actual run itself, and they will have various dialogue based on the user's religion and the hero themselves, I believe. So this is kind of an interesting one. About half of the heroes that come with Black Reliquary, and you can see this in the hero information in case you have also added any other heroes via extra mods or anything like that, have 100% chance to become afflicted, and that comes with their own bonuses and whatnot. If you don't learn how to contain them or have a lot of stress Curios that will minus their stress so they act out less, they can become very detrimental to your party. Just things to keep in note that the Thrall, for example, will become ferocious 100% of the time. He has no way of becoming virtued. So he will do more damage, he will have more speed, and he will have less accuracy while he is ferocious, and he will have harmful act outs and reactions, meaning he will actually do damage to your party. The Hexer becomes cannibalistic, has a lot of the pre-mentioned things and has a 50% chance to forcibly interact with corpse Curios while cannibalistic. You can see where that would be bad in some cases. The Philomath also 100% chance to become consumed, along with a bunch of other stuff, harmful act outs and reactions that give horror instead of stress. You can see where that's also bad, and 40% chance to forcibly interact with Cavarot's related Curios. Another thing that I would rather not have. So that is something to keep an eye on and to just keep in mind for group composition. Either knowing that you need to keep an eye on that and keep a cap on their stress through interactions and things like that, or some way of party composition. We all know how every character has their own little bit of quirks they can get. There are some that are worse than others to have, and especially with the negative quirks, be on the lookout for ones that have anything that has forcibly interact with any curio or a specific type of curio depending upon where you're going. Depending upon the area, it's not just the treasury, but especially in the treasury, this will force a lot of fights that you might not want to get into. Certain curios also will just spawn fights outside of the treasury. There's ones in every single area that can do this. It's a very big thing to get rid of these however you can. You can do that by going to the treatment ward in the clinic and paying that. However, that gets very, very expensive very, very quickly depending upon, how many heroes you have to do that on, especially considering they can get it back. There is a curio that can spawn in any single area that you will need a key to interact with. This removes a negative quirk. Otherwise, the biggest area I have found to go into it is the caverns. There's multiple things in there that can remove negative quirks. Just bring a few heroes that have negative quirks you want to remove. I really prefer removing ones that have forcibly interact with Curio, and hopefully then they don't interact with the Curio I need to interact with, and getting rid of these. It's just a luck of the draw of getting what you need in there though, so good luck with that. For that, it's the cheaper way. So this one's a little bit hard to explain visually, so bear with me really quick here. Unless you have very specific plans, multiple healers or multiple sources of healing will pay off in the long run. So for example here, we have a group that has the Vestal, who has a single target heal and an AoE heal, and everyone else in here can heal themselves at least somewhat. In addition to that, I could throw on some healing trinkets to amp up that a little bit more, make it a little more of a comfy group. I would be okay running this group. I'd feel fine running this group. However, that being said, if we were to say switch out the Leper and switch out the Hellion, and then say put in the Bounty Hunter and I think the Adjudicator. So if I was being careful, this group might be okay. Let's not put into anything like how weirdly this group would work together. They could still work, but it would be a lot more dangerous because there's a lot less sources of healing, most of it still coming from the Vestal and the Houndmaster keeping himself alive. But then the Bounty Hunter is 100% relying on everything else, and same with the Adjudicator. Still okay. If anything happens to the Vestal, or she can't act for a turn or whatever, then anyone else is kind of screwed if things go down. Which is why multiple sources of healing, especially if they can be used on other people, like say, even Anquinarian using Mending Vapors, or heck, even the Plague Doctor with Battlefield Medicine can keep people alive in a very tight situation. Just having backup heals on a character that otherwise maybe you might not use unless it's a very bad situation as your fourth move can be a very good thing to do. If you're having people that can heal or have blocks or upping dodge, might be worth taking. Because if you've seen any of my runs, even very good runs can go very south very, very, very quickly, and even sources of multiple healing can be hampered very, very quickly. So best be prepared, especially in the early runs and especially when you're still getting used to the game. Every area has enemies that are semi-specialized in at least something, be that effects, damage over time, debuff, or damage. It's best to kind of go prepared. Every area on especially champion levels has enemies that are especially specialized in this. If one area has enemies that do extra bleed damage, they will probably do more bleed damage. If an area has something that does blight, they will probably either do more blight damage or extra damage to blighted characters, if you kind of get where this is going. Stress will do more stress damage, so on and so on. I'm guessing if more areas get added to this will follow that. On that note, just because enemies seem to do specific things in specific areas does not mean that you won't take other things in that area. If you get a lot of bleed damage in the exposed interior, that doesn't mean you're not going to take some stress damage, some debuffs, some marking, things like that. If you're taking high stress damage, it doesn't mean you're not going to take both bleed and blight in the caverns. If you're just taking lots of damage, movement, debuffs, things like that in the catacombs, there's still a chance to be bled. And, well, the treasury has just about everything as well. While going prepared for specific things, you might want to also go prepared for the little things that you might not expect as well in your first few ventures. There are also enemies with very powerful types of powers, the first of which summons enemies if there are space on their side of the field for enemies to come into place. Some of these don't require anything, some of these require dead bodies on their side, either of which adds extra enemies for you to have to fight, and you will have to fight them to end the fight regardless if the summoner is dead or not. Depending upon who you're fighting, these will just be extra enemies that you know about, and some of these are exclusive to the summoner and have extra abilities attached to them like guarding and things like that, adding extra mechanics to the fight, which can just be things that you do not want to deal with. The second of which is if very specific enemies are left for last, they summon entirely new fights. And that's not to say fight 1 ends, fight 2 begins. That means during the first fight, they will summon 3 new enemies, and then you have to deal with them and the 3 new enemies. I haven't tested yet on some of them, whether or not they summon more and more enemies if left alone. I kind of learned my lesson and let them die before that happened again. It can be very devastating to go into a fight, get quite a bit of damage done to you, and then have them entirely summon a new fight that can deal either a lot of stress or a lot more damage when you're not really expecting it. So things like this are things to watch out for. Some vendors have extremely rare drops here, like the Poacher's Garb, the Scavenging Manual, the Archaeologist's Compendium, and things among these. I think there are a few others. They are like a below 1% chance to get them, but you can get them from any interaction that would give you loot, is my understanding. But it has to come from very specific vendors in very specific areas to get these. From the vendors that do give them, you can literally give them anything that they would take for a chance to get said loot. The chance to get them does not increase with better loot. These also cannot be gotten anywhere else except for those particular vendors, so it's worth trying to get them until you have them, just in case you want them in the future. The same can be said for very specific curios. They cannot be gotten anywhere else except for with very specific interactions with very specific curios. This one, for example, have to interact with a very specific curio with a very specific way to get it. Not doing that means you will not get the amber encased specimens. As you can see, you can't heal with battlefield medicine, which is like a 2 to 3 heal, but now instead it's a 4 heal per turn for 3 turns. You also guard the target. There are a bunch of other curios that give other things like this, so it's worth trying things out just to see if you can't get rare things from said interactions, because you can't get them anywhere else. One more thing about the curios around any map is that most of them have multiple ways of interacting with them, especially with the supplies that you can bring. Different supplies will have different reactions depending upon what you use. Go ahead and experiment, find what you like to use on what, and depending upon the situation, what you might need to use when, if you need to save a curio, something like that, because some of my favorite curios, sometimes I need to actually save for other circumstances or on a boss run, I might need to use them differently. So in the beginning, it's very, very good to experiment, even though you might have found one use for something, to use other items. Even using firewood on certain things can be very good. You never know. Here's one that may be a little controversial. However, there are many, many, many trinkets that one can change the gameplay of many different heroes, and two can be very dangerous, I suppose would be the right term to use. Dangerous to use, if not used correctly. You basically have to look at the tooltip for each one. For example, calming herbs here. It's only a rare, but battlefield medicine can no longer cure blight and bleed. So if you're used to using that for so long, and you automatically go to it to cure blight and bleed, and it doesn't do it and a hero dies, well, that happens. It's happened to me. There's other ones that make it so that the Plague Doctor can't cure any damage outright normally. There's even ones that make it so you basically can't heal stress at all, or heal damage in combat, but they will heal outside of combat. There are ones that will reduce your max health but heal you. There are ones that make it so stress healing is harder. So it's all in how you plan on using them. They can be very good tools, but once again, this is a make sure you're planning on using them right. Otherwise, plans will backfire very quickly, or you might not intend on taking that 4 damage from, say, the Clockwork Heart or more, because plus 15% damage taken on attack hit, so that will amp up very quickly. Very quickly, that will be 20 damage a hit or more. And you might not intend on taking that much damage on your leper. So it's all in how you plan on using these. I'm not saying any of these are bad. Some of these are very fun to use. Used incorrectly or without the proper planning, these will lead to party wipes fairly quickly. There are more than I can count in this game that can actually do that, so be a little careful with your trinkets. That being said, there are many that also change gameplay, like the Flesh-Eating Helm here. Will change your Flagellant from a bleed character to a blight character. Changes everything he does that normally does bleed into blight. The Seismic Sensor will make the Tremor skill on the Thrall usable from any row, making him very viable in any row. There are many situations like this, some of which change entire movesets, like Living Ammo, or the Pure Amber Core, or other ones that just add effects to certain heroes. So once again, things just to look at, things to have fun with, or, just things to add on to your heroes with, all in how you play and how you want to use them. This has come up a few times now. Mementos are very rare, extremely rare trinkets that only appear for the heroes that are on the current quest. So, for example, this Bride's Veil here will only appear for a Veiled if the Veiled is actually on the current run you are in. And then it can appear randomly, so it can be from a loot curio, it can be from a vendor, it can be from a boss fight, and it can be from just a random fight drop. It has a low chance to drop from any of those. I do believe they can be from any difficulty. I'm not sure though if the difficulty affects the drop rate. I haven't quite figured that one out yet. However, I have gotten more of them at higher difficulties, and I have gotten more of them from bosses. I'm not sure if that's my personal luck with them. However, that being said, it does seem like that hero has to be along with them, and then from there it's just kind of a loot everything you can scenario to get said memento until you get what you need. So if you really want the Flagellant or the Thrall mementos, you literally have to just keep bringing them until you get them. I'm on a week 167 and I only have 12 mementos, if that puts into perspective of how rare these are and how bad my luck can be. So I wanted to touch very briefly on these Twilight Trinkets. You might have noticed them if you're just starting out and you found your first champion level quest or run or whatever you want to call it, and they may look really good at first. You might be wondering, why are they even there? They can be incredibly helpful if you plan your team out correctly. But here's the thing, if you think you planned your team out correctly and you didn't, they can be incredibly detrimental. things like the Twilight Pulsar, the Twilight Hourglass, the Twilight Flambeau, Twilight Enamel. All of these, even the Twilight Signature, can be incredibly detrimental to you if not used correctly. So use them with caution. Please use them with caution. I have had a lot of issues, especially with the Twilight Signature and the Twilight Hourglass. I've tried using them in multiple runs that ended up not even being posted on the channel. They went that poorly. Just user beware. I should note, though, that things like the Twilight Pulsar, the Twilight Razor, the Twilight Enamel, even the Twilight Pendant, used correctly, are extremely powerful. It's just using them correctly and making sure you have things planned out correctly. I don't want to scare people away from using them because they can be very fun to use. I'm just trying to stress the point of using them with caution just so you don't lose a lot of high level heroes and or these trinkets and have to go fight the Ghoul Mother for them again. The Perfumer's Trinkets shown here are rare trinkets that are only found in hidden rooms, and then you talk to a NPC in there, he will give you a rare trinket based on the area you are in, and then these trinkets can level up if you find him again. Depending upon the area you find him is what trinket you get. If you find him in the treasury, you get the inconspicuous cactus. If you find him in the caverns, you get the seed shell. If you find him in the catacombs, you get a version of the axe. I don't have a level 1 to show you, but I have the Whispering Axe, so you'll get a lesser version of this one. If you find him in the exposed interior, you will get a version of the cowl. Once again, I don't have a level 1 to show you, but you will get a version of this cowl. Then, to level them up, you simply have to find him again. However, this time it doesn't matter where you find him, you just simply have to bring your trinket from your equipped stuff into your inventory, then give it to him. So if you have the axe, you find him in the treasury, you just simply give him the axe and it will level up. Eventually, you'll get Valkyria, which is the final form of the helmet, Sephiroth, the final form of the seed shell, Charybdis, the final form of the inconspicuous cactus, and then Azazel, the final form of the axe. Now, fun little thing about these is, one, as you can see, you can kind of get as many of them as you want, as many as you kind of find him. You can have as many levels as you want, as seen by the fact that I have 2 Azazels. But say you want an Azazel on someone. Well, you can't equip a second Azazel. However, what you can do, for a slightly diminished version of the effect, is equip a lesser version of that trinket. And you will still have that effect happen. So it may not be, exactly what you want happening, but it is still considerable if you want to stack those effects. However, some of them have other trinkets that do some of the same effect for a better thing. So if you're trying to stack for the crit on Azazel, for example, there are better ways to go about it. But if you're going for the on-attack crit, you do you. Now, kind of like with the Perfumer, there are trinkets for the Yngolian, who is a optional elite / boss fight that you can do if you find his Curio out in the wild. He drops multiple different types of trinkets as a reward for fighting him, and these level up as well. They have different criteria though, however, for leveling them up. So for example, the Waking Gibbous is the level 1 of it. You would have to fight him on difficulty level 3+ to level it up, and then keep going from there. The 2 versions I have found are the Waking Gibbous and the Transforming Sphere. Those level up into Curios and to Eclipse, and just like the Perfumer weapons here, if you wanted to stack the effects, you can. However, you cannot equip 2 of the same ones. However, that being said, you do have to kill the Yngolian how many times to find each of them and then level them up. So good luck with that unless you have a very good group for hunting him or just very good luck in general. The Ghoul Mother is a boss that once beaten seems to be repeatable, and the nice part about that is, other than getting you a little bit of Dark, which translates to gold for you, is a basically infinite stream of getting lost trinkets back. So say your heroes die and full party wipe, or for whatever reason you aren't able to get some trinkets back. I think it's after 8 trinkets have been lost, you should be able to get a spawn for her back, and then go fight her, get your lost Curios back as well. The 2 things I've kind of noticed with this is that You just need to lose 8 trinkets. I don't think you need to lose more than that for her to spawn. I believe, don't quote me on this, they may have changed this. She can spawn on either champion or veteran difficulty. I have seen her on veteran once. I'm not sure if that was a glitch, if it's just really rare, or if they've just changed that out. But I actually have seen her on veteran difficulty, but once she is spawned, it doesn't seem like she goes away until you beat her, and she is locked in on that difficulty. This will be probably the only hero one I do, but I thought it was worth a very good mention here. The Dredge, as most of you know, has Eldritch Core. While in mech mode, it builds up heat based on the moves you do. Pretty self-explanatory, I think everyone knows about this. However, once it reaches 100 heat is when Weird Conflagration does both the most damage and the most critical it can do at its base. And when it's at 100 heat is when you're considered overheating. This does a few other things other than make Conflagration do the most damage it can. 1, it makes you take a stacking debuff that increases damage taken until you've left the mech. I can't remember exactly how much the percentage is on hand, but every single time you attack with the Dredge while you're overheated, that number goes up by the same amount. And then 2, every time you attack while overheated, you will damage yourself because the mech is overheating essentially. And eventually it gets to be a lot of damage if you leave the Dredge in that. If you find that the damage stacking is being too much at any point in time, there is a way to reset this. So what you would do is, in any fight, you can use Eldritch Core again to leave mech mode. This leaves the Dredge on foot though. So I find it best to have the Dredge leave mech mode into foot mode at the end of a fight, then preferably either in a room battle or in a hallway battle where I know the next room is empty. That way you can camp, which would get Eldritch Core back. That way in the next fight, you can use Eldritch Core again, getting the Dredge back into mech mode, with no stacking debuff on it at the present and your heat level reset. Now that being said, heat level will build back up, the stacking debuff will build back up, but everything is set back to 0. That's kind of it for what I have for tips in this game, what I've kind of learned. After all my playing here, there were some things I did leave out, like I said in the beginning. Some of those usually are covered in the tooltips or in the loading screens, so I didn't think them as important to put in here just for brevity's sake. However, that being said, if you have any tips or anything that didn't make it into this video, feel free to put them down in the comments. If you have any questions, put them down there as well. I'll try my best to get to them. And otherwise, as always, I wish you all well. I will see you next time, and please have a good one.